Awesome. Well, good evening. Tonight, I have the pleasure of welcoming Sam Marion to our meeting. He is one of my favorite people in the world and a licensed clinical social worker, if I can talk, residing just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And hydration's important. He's got a rich educational background in social work and advanced trainings in neurodivergence, trauma, and executive functioning. Sam brings a unique perspective to his work as a therapist, consultant, speaker, coach, content creator, and now author. Last month, he put out into the world a book called Embracing All Brains, a 30-day guided journal for becoming a neurodivergent affirming educator. So really excited about that, and I'm sure there's more books to come, knowing Sam. But tonight, Sam will be presenting on the topic of what is neurodiversity, and he's going to share fundamental concepts of neurodiversity, shedding light on its relevance to the LGBTQIA plus community. And through his experience and passion for advocacy, Sam will also guide us through a bit of a discussion that highlights the intersectionality of neurodivergence and LGBTQIA plus identities. And he'll be offering valuable insights and perspectives. And that's why I intentionally asked him to be here with us tonight, because I think more folks are starting to learn, especially within the LGBTQ plus community, that they are autistic or ADHD, or in my case, both. So yeah, without further ado, in the chat, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sam. And I'm gonna put you back in the spotlight when I can figure out how to get rid of myself. All right. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Like Charlie said, my name is Sam Marion, and I'm sort of losing my voice. I'm in a hotel. I'm traveling. I'm presenting at a conference. It seemed like the perfect time when Charlie asked me to join the meeting and present, because this is Neurodiversity Celebration Week, and so I'm really excited. I am somebody who will talk way too much because I love everything about what I'm talking about tonight. And so I'm just really honored and thrilled to be here. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I will go through some slides here. It'll take me just a moment to pull this up and presenter mode so you can be seen a little better. All right, here we go. So what is neurodiversity? And if it seems, I always have to tell people when I present through my computer, like I should be changing slides, but I'm not. I do have a child who I let use my computer one time, and now the next, like the right arrow doesn't work always. So welcome to my life. So who am I? A little bit about me and Charlie gave a great introduction. I'm very, very honored. And I was asked to give a little bit of information about myself, and Charlie added some. But this is my lived experience. I identify as mostly neurodivergent, which for me is autistic, ADHD, gifted. I have a reading disability, executive function challenges. The list kind of goes on and on and on. So I live this out on a daily basis. I'm a clinical social worker. I'm in private practice. And so I work with families. I work with kids. I work with adults. Just in terms of autistic folks, I have clients from age 5 to early 60s. So a wide range. So I'm not somebody who just works with kids. I do it all. I work with families. I love working with families because so often I have parents who they reach out to me and they say, my child has just gotten this diagnosis. We've just learned this. We need help. And they think they're calling to get therapy for their child. and I end up working with the parents and how to support their young person. This happens frequently. I'm actually really excited. I'm about to meet a young person for the first time. Their parents reached out almost a year ago, and they're finally, and it's like, it seems now is the time for me to meet the kid. And it's only because the kid said, hey, I want to meet that Sam guy who they've been hearing about. It's all about supporting families. So much of the work that I do, because as I tell the parents, sure, your kid can spend 45 minutes or an hour a week with me, but they spend way more time with you. So let's help support in your environment. And it's hard to find good exact numbers on people. I think, you know, in terms of the intersectionality of neurodivergence and the LGBTQIA plus community. But I think even there, where I start talking about how valuable it is to support those who are supporting a person, even that starts to, I think, align with that feeling of so many young people who are members of the LGBTQIA plus community. Their families find that they need support, and the best way to support that young person. So even that, I think, starts to show that alignment. And I should just say that I hope that you can understand my accent. Oftentimes in Georgia, I can say, well, y'all are from somewhere else. Y'all are the ones that talk funny, but since I'm the one invited in, I have to acknowledge it's me. And as I'm losing my voice after I gave several lectures today in person, it's not helping anything. So I do apologize about that. But let's start with some definitions of some very basic words of neurodiversity. What is neurodiversity? These are just the differences in the ways that people's brains function and experience the world. The neurodiversity movement is a social movement that's all about an effort to increase acceptance and inclusion of all neurological processes. That all the ways that people's brains work, the way that our nervous systems interact with the world, they're all valid and they're all okay. That's what the movement's about. But I'm going to go a little more detail about that in just a minute. Neurodivergence is a variation from normative or typical neurological experiences. Neurodivergent is having these neurological traits that are outside of the neuronormative culture. This is about being outside of that. And I say neuronormative, this is where I get really nerdy and excited about research kind of stuff. And every assessment tool out there that's used is normed off of somebody, right? This is sort of scientific language. But so often it's not a representative sample. And like there are assessment tools that have been normed off of, for example, middle-class white boys from Minnesota. And that's just not a representative group for our country, much less on an international scale. And so I get kind of nitpicky about that language, and you'll hear me use neuronormative. Neurotypical to me implies that there's a way that you're supposed to be. There's this typical way of being. And I think there's actually much more diversity in the way we experience the world than people have historically acknowledged. And I think that's a really important thing for us to think about. And then neurodiverse, people use the words neurodivergent and neurodiverse interchangeably sometimes. And I feel strongly that these are not interchangeable words. Neurodiverse, an individual is neurodivergent. A group is neurodiverse. I think we've got 13 of us on here right now. And we have each person on this call has a slightly different or maybe very different way that your nervous system interacts with the world. We are a neurodiverse group. And that's a beautiful thing to me. Okay. I do want to go back to we're talking about neurodivergence and say that there are kind of two categories of this. We can split it off between sort of natural or inborn neurodivergence. This is who we are. And then we have acquired neurodivergence. And this is where something happens and our nervous system changes how it interacts with the world. So this is a traumatic brain injury. This is other types of traumatic experiences. We go through something and then we interact with the world differently afterwards. So that's acquired neurodivergence. I didn't add a word that I think is important for me to talk about in here, but but I don't always cover it when I lecture. But there's another term that is used more and more, and the word's neuroqueer. And this is where people say, my neurological processes, the way that my nervous system interacts with the world, and my gender or my sexual orientation, these cannot be separated. These are all interwoven as part of who I am. And for some people, owning that as part of their identity, because some of these things, these are identities, right? I identify as mostly neurodivergent. And so somebody's saying that this encapsulates that word, very much describes their identity and multiple aspects of their identity brought together. Okay. So I didn't take the time because this is part of who I am. I like things to be really precise and all the spacing, and I got kind of stressed out on that. So I thought I'll just talk about that one. So the neurodiversity movement, this goes back to probably the early 90s. There's some publications, some kind of seminal text early on that really started to challenge the prevailing beliefs. A lot of this it's in the mental health system that they're starting to challenge that, hey, these things you're calling them problems, maybe they're not problems, maybe they're differences. Okay. Then in the late 90s, there's some debate about this, about who first coined the term of neurodiversity. Most people attribute it to Judith Singer. She was doing work mostly in the autism community. And many people within this neurodiversity movement, even though she's mostly credited for coining the term, are increasingly distancing themselves from her due to some of her language and some other of her views. But I think it is important to say that the term neurodiversity is just not that old of a term. She's Australian, so it's just taking time. So for people who've said, hey, I don't know this word, neurodiversity, some of that, I'm a social worker, and I have been for a decade. This is not a word that was taught in my graduate program. It's taken time. Okay. In the early 2000s, autistic self-advocacy groups started showing up, and that was a big part of the movement. And then online communities, advocacy has just grown more and more since that early 2000s. And then the pandemic hit, and so many people were online, and this is when it's really has taken off, truly has taken off. Some language that I think is important for us to recognize. I mean, real quick on this, driven again, because so much of the early parts of the neurodiversity movement and even ongoing comes from autistic self-advocates, which acknowledge that in the realm of disability, a long time ago, people were using identity first language, and the disability movements shifted towards, no, we should use person first language. We need to recognize that people with disabilities are person first. And now the autistic movements are pushing back, saying, no, this is part of my identity. So I'm an autistic person. And other identities many of them are following along, but it's autistic adults that are definitely driving that. A survey done in the last year or two of over 10,000 autistic adults, 80-something% now are saying that the preference is identity first language. 4 or 5 years ago, it was in the 60%. So this is a very active and growing movement, and even the language that's used is a big part of that. People say, no, there's nothing wrong with me. This is part of who I am. My autism, the fact that I'm autistic, it impacts every aspect of my life. It's who I am, and I'm good with it. I'm ADHD. This is who I am, and I don't want to be separated from that. Functioning labels versus support needs. Now, I'm very open and vocal about the fact that the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is a book that's about this thick. We're on DSM-5, text revision. It's a big book. I don't care for the book as a whole, but autism, I think that one aspect of that they got really, it's wonderful, because it doesn't talk about high functioning or low functioning. That's not in there. It talks about the level of support needs that a person has. And I feel strongly that every person that I know has support needs. Everybody has support needs. And it's not linear high to low, that varies. Different traits that we hold have different support needs. So functioning labels of high functioning versus low functioning, these don't allow us to individualize how we support a person. They don't make sense. And so even when we say high function, it's problematic. I give examples of a student in school that so many students are, maybe they're really incredible in their math class, but their literature class, not so much a strong suit. And if we let that math teacher categorize them and tell everybody that they're high functioning because they did great math, then they would really struggle even more in that literature class. Instead, we can acknowledge, oh, this student has different needs in each class, and they may need tutoring over here, but they're great. They don't support needs. So, and I think it's really wonderful language. And when we use that language of support needs, then it's such a natural conversation to say, okay, well, what are those support needs? And again, we don't need to have a diagnosis or not any some sort of neurodivergent identity to have support needs. Everybody has support needs. That's part of the human experience. And I think that this is language that when people can incorporate that into their like relationships with friends, family, what support do you need? What support do I need? That can go a long way in all relationships. Real quick, some models of disability, because this comes out of the neurodivergent movement as well, or a big part of the neurodiversity movement. Medical model of disability, they would say the problem of the person as a result of a health condition. You have that disability, and that's a real bummer for you. And hopefully you can figure out, overcome that in our medical system and our society. And it very much leaves a problem is that of the individual. The social model of disability, which is really pushing some social movements, is that the disability is created by society as a result of a lack of inclusion, accommodation, and or integration. Person is disabled when we disable them. We do not include them. We do not accommodate those very real support needs. A person may not be inherently disabled because they are a wheelchair user, but a building that does not have an entrance for them disables them. They're not included. They're not full participants. We do not include them. And this is a really challenging thing here in America, where we want to include people and we can try, but we have big systems that really do make that difficult. These are all part of the neurodiversity movement pushing some of this. Okay, so I talk about it's not high function, low functioning. So neurodivergent spectrums, it's not this line, it's this beautiful color spectrum where every blend and color, every shade, these are all these different traits. They show up in different ways. And if we took everybody on this call or everybody who watches this video in the future and we plotted all of their traits as a human on there, we would all look different. And I think that's a beautiful thing of looking at the diversity of it. So some common identities and diagnoses that fall under this. The DSM I referenced that a minute ago. So autism spectrum disorder, always list that first, because again, that's sort of where some of this movement first came from. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, some learning disabilities. And there are people who would say, well, this is kind of the neurodivergent umbrella, is these kind of neurological processes. And dyslexia challenges reading. I won't go into all the details of that right now. Dyscalculia, it's a math disability. Dysgraphia is a writing disability. I always kind of joked that, like, is that still a disability? Because do kids nowadays even write very much? Turns out some do. And there are people who say, yeah, that's the neurodivergent umbrella, because that's sort of the origins of it. And there are people who say, the whole DSM is the neurodivergent umbrella that we should be supporting and accepting. But other ones that people certainly include depression, anxiety, but there are people, again, that will very quickly include bipolar and schizophrenia, sort of anything that's in the DSM would say, well, yeah, these are neurodivergent identities or diagnoses. And there are people who say, hey, you know, a minute ago, you were talking about the language there, and I don't want to be known as a depressed person. And that's fair. And so oftentimes I find people use language more along the lines of a person who experiences depression, a person who experiences anxiety, as opposed to a person with. So that may be a little bit nitpicky there. Some things that are not in the DSM. So these are not official diagnoses that a mental health practitioner can give. Sensory processing disorder. And this is, and I'm not really defining all these due to time today. But also love talking about these things. So if someone on this call is like, hey, I think I need to know more about that, or someone watches videos, like, I think I need to know more, I'm more than happy to help you find more information. But sensory processing disorder is really having a hard time with a whole wide range of sensory experiences. A highly sensitive person is very similar to that. There are people who'd say, you know, these are very similar to some of those that are in the DSM, just maybe without the social challenges, things like that. Pathological demand avoidance, or PDA, also positively reframed as persistent drive for autonomy. And this is a subset of autism that's growing in awareness over the last, slowly for 20 years, but really in the last year has grown quite a bit in awareness. And this is sort of any of these neurodivergent identities or diagnoses. What we find is these are all aspects of a person that likely activates their nervous system's threat response much more quickly or easily. And with PDA, it's just that much more so when there's someone perceives any kind of demands or expectations. So again, I won't spend too much time on any one little part of this. I'm trying to cover lots of things. Masking is a phenomenon most often connected to the autistic community, but in the neurodivergent community, where neurodivergent individuals work really hard to hide the neurodivergences in order to appear neuronormative. It is described as an exhausting experience that contributes to many mental health challenges, such as depression and anxiety. And this is also a contributing factor to why so many adults are identifying as autistic, ADHD, things like that now, because people spent their life trying to be somebody that they weren't, because they thought that's what they had to do. We thought we needed to blend in a certain way. I was identified as autistic about a year and a half ago. And I've spent a lot of time sort of peeling off this mask to understand who I really am. What do I want versus, and like what I want from my life versus what I was doing, because I thought this is what I was supposed to make my life look like. In some very real ways, the way I presented myself to the world. And this is also, and this is feedback that I get, this is very, very similar for many people who are in the LGBTQIA plus community who feel a need to live in the closet, right? And not come out, not be open about their full identity, or not be open about much of it, all of their true identity, because it doesn't feel safe, and they spend a lot of time trying to be somebody that they are not. And it's exhausting, and it contributes to so many mental health challenges. And I think it's not that difficult to see why a person who cannot be their authentic self in this world would feel depressed, or trying to hide who they are would feel anxious. Because what if I'm exposed for who I truly am, rather than accepting who I am and being open about that? Some common neurodivergent traits: challenges with executive functioning. When I talked about sensory stuff a minute ago, there's at least 8 sensory systems. I won't cover the first 5 because we learned these in school. But the vestibular system is all about balance and movement. Many neurodivergent people that I know get like car sick really easily, motion sick, lose their balance easily. But all of these are also things we do to kind of regulate our bodies too. So sometimes people move a lot. Presenting over Zoom, I'm so much different when I present in person. I don't stand still when I present in person. I pace around, I move a lot, and I'm much more present when I do so. Part of why I move my arms a lot, I do it in person as well, but I'm doing it even on Zoom because the movement helps me to stay connected and be here in the moment. Proprioception is all about kind of our body position. Many neurodivergent people will sort of say they're a little bit clumsy, They knock into things that they think they're walking around a table, but they still bump into it because it just that body awareness is just there's a challenge there. Many neurodivergent kids are kind of right up in people's space, and you're going, "What? Can you let's slide back a little bit?" And they didn't even notice that they'd gotten that close. And so some of this starts to come into where people may struggle with like hand-eye coordination because their awareness of like where their hands are trying to catch a ball, things like that gets difficult. Interoception is all the signals from inside the body. So all those like bio needs and signals that we have from inside the body that are you gotta go to the bathroom, you're hungry, you're thirsty, but also emotions. We don't think emotions, we feel emotions. And so we get signals from inside of our body that we interpret as, oh, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, whatever it may be. So many neurodivergent people get a lot of signals from inside their body. And so sometimes when you have a lot of noise from within, it's easy also to miss certain things. So forget to drink water because they don't notice I'm thirsty or things like that until that noise gets really loud and has to override the others. And so that's many times the neurodivergent people with this, they may not realize they're hungry until they are like really, really hungry, or they got to really go to the bathroom, things like that. Ultimately, we're talking about differences in how the world is seen, processed, and experienced. Executive functioning, real quick. It's a skill set that includes the capacity for planning, self-control, following directions, things like that. Here's a list of 6. Activation, which is getting started on a project. Focus, which is keeping your focus here even when there's distractions around you. Effort is like putting the right amount of energy into something and sustaining that energy on that project you're working on. Emotion regulation, I'll come back to that one, but it's all about kind of more often people describe it as more like emotionally disconnecting so you can do what you need to do. Memory, there's short-term memory, long-term memory. Action, which is more about some reflecting over what you've done and maybe you need to make changes to your approach to things. Did you leave not enough time? You need to start earlier. That's all the action. It is my contention, though, that emotion regulation is not an executive function. It is a prerequisite for executive functioning. You don't have the capacity to plan or have self-control or follow directions when you're interrupted and these other things when your emotional energy is at a high level. Whether it's you're just really excited because some amazing thing is happening, or you're really scared because some scary things happening, whatever it may be, when our emotional level is up, we are not regulated, none of these other executive functions can be in play. I know I have questions coming in, but I'll sort of try to answer all those at the end. Neurodiversity is seeing people cupcakes. Beautiful to me. Imagine how boring this world would be if everybody thought and experienced the world the exact same way. So all of these are cupcakes, and they're all different, but they are all still cupcakes. I would not personally want the one with peppermints on it, but somebody does, and that's a beautiful thing. But the rest of them, I love cupcakes. I love all baked goods. Neurodiversity is like cupcakes, and it's beautiful. All right. I'm going to skip through the boring part of references. Here's my contact information. I'll leave that there just for a moment. If anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to be available. And then I'm going to stop the screen share. It'll be easier for me to go through the chat without it, but I'm just leaving that up another 2 seconds.